Good idea.
And I know that our current practice has been a generally rotating other board member. I don't know if it's helpful to put that in, if that's too much content for a policy, but I think that's our intention. We did that today, we got it through May. So I don't know that that's necessary, but I think that's our intention, so I don't know that it needs to be in writing.
My inclination is to keep that out to allow for flexibility.
Agreed,
Yeah,
agreed. I just
but I think that.
reiterating what we are feeling, but yeah, you never know what's.
Because I know I probably will go
I
to
don't be
less,
overly prescriptive.
I'll probably go to less than all of you, and knowing by my not going, that's my,
Right.
I don't get to have that conversation, or I'm not part of that conversation.
But I think
It's
adding
sad.
that, but in adding that phrase, I think that's a good idea to just document what our standard practice is now.
That's what we do.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, so let me just clarify, everyone is in agreement? Any questions or wished upon, or we will bring this again next board meeting. So just if anyone wants to tweak the language, we will still look at this in its entirety again.
Under communications,
So which number?
number 17. I would like to add or board president, and the reason for that is I don't really get personnel complaints, so I think maybe I went to Larry with one, maybe. But I also feel like if there was something that I think that you should be someone I could entrust that information to too, if you were accessible and Larry wasn't,
And this is one I actually would like to talk about, because there might be instances where it's not appropriate for another board member, if it's potentially private or confidential information, that perhaps still getting a complaint to the superintendent might be the best practice. I definitely want to talk about it, but thinking through it, there might be a situation where it's not appropriate for the board president to be involved.
I believe it's in the contract, and appropriately so, that any complaints that a board member receives are directed to the superintendent. And I think there's a whole host of reasons why that's appropriate information flow.
Yes, I was going to say that that is a specific provision of my employment contract, one of the expectations of the board and I. And also I would say that it's a reflection of the fact that as the board, unless the complaint is against me, all supervision of employees comes up through the administrative chain, of which I'm the top of the administrative chain. So I think that's the basis for that.
yeah, that's a good point. And I think what's really been helpful is having that form, because if people want to complain, they can go complain to the form. I mean, that's okay, you have a process.
Right.
Correct.
And I think I've only elevated at one point. It wasn't anyone here, by the way. It was at a school level, which I didn't want to elevate it. But, okay. And then the last one is the 21. So I know that we've talked clearly with Buzz about what the protocol is for social media, and I think we're all clear on that. However, I don't like it being this prescriptive. I'm not comfortable with it being this prescriptive in the language. And I just think that there's a lot of gray areas. Take out commenting on a school, you know, a discussion website or a neighbor's, you know, those are, I don't see any of us doing that. But I think there's other things that, you know, I was talking to Amy, and I said, you know, my son goes to, you know, DJ goes to a private school. What if they have a Facebook page? And I'm not talking about the district, but I'm talking about something that they're doing at their school that could be, and I don't know whether 3 board members, I mean, I just think it leaves, I'm not comfortable with it being this prescriptive. So I buy into the spirit of this, and I think anyone can look at my social media fingerprint and see I don't like to talk about politics anywhere for the most part. But I'm just not comfortable with it being quite this prescriptive. I don't think it's really been vetted yet in a court system. I think the Open Public Meetings Act, as far as some other things have been tested. I don't think this has yet. It probably will be at some point. I don't want to be the test case, by the way. So,
And just to clarify, it's the last sentence, the language of the sentence that we added.
yeah,
It's the one that you have
it's
concerns
just,
about.
I feel it's too prescriptive, and I feel that we all get where this is, and this is a different, we're starting with us, and, we know that, but I think there's unforeseen things.
So
I don't have anything in particular, but.
And just to clarify, so again, what we just talked about in our retreat and with Buzz, our council, the idea that as a school board director, if we comment on social media, just so we have the same, just want to make sure we have the same understanding that if we comment on social media and a quorum of board members is participating, and this gets to your point about it being vague language, and then we do agree that it can be an OPMA violation, or there's a risk of it being interpreted as that, and so as a board, we have verbally decided that we won't be commenting online, correct? So the point of discussion is not on the agreement that we had as a board, that we won't be discussing. The question is the language itself.
Correct. I think I feel like there's a lot of different, I don't exactly know how to put it in words. I feel like there's a lot of different tentacles, avenues, and I myself am very careful, and since we've talked to Buzz, I make that commitment, but I don't like it being quite this prescriptive. And I think we're beyond that right now, and a lot of these board protocols might have been so prescriptive for different reasons, but I don't think that we need that. If we do, then we can make an amendment and do it later, or we can add it at a different time.
So Kimberly, can you point out to me where the prescriptiveness is? Because as I'm reading it, it's an informative, kind of just giving us some background understanding of the law. It doesn't actually give a thou shall not statement. It just seems to be providing us a better understanding of how the law operates.
I feel, while I respect what you're saying, I do not see it through that lens.
Okay.
And I feel the board recognizes that social media is a public forum, and all Open Public Meetings Act and operating protocols apply is exactly saying that we need to follow the Open Public Meetings Act and live social media. We needed to discuss with Buzz what further does that mean, just like many other Open Public Meeting Act regulations. We need to have discussions about them, we need to have training about them, but we don't put every single one in our board protocols. So that's where I'm feeling like this is the one we're putting in there, but we're not putting all of the other Open Public Meeting Act, regulations in here. So to me, it feels like we're singling one out, and we needed to have that discussion, but I don't think we should single that out in a board protocol. One section of an Open Public Meeting Act. So I think the first part I don't mind.
Okay. So fair enough. I think for me, the reason why I like it there is this is the developing area, and I'll admit the courts are behind, but there are several school districts in the area that have gotten in trouble, and this is being tested as we speak. Texting for sure.
This doesn't exist.
No, but but my point is social media is already causing problems for other government agencies in our area. So for me, I read it as gives me further understanding of what the law reads, how I should be behaving, and it is going to be a continuous concern that we need to be monitoring, I think.
Yes. When I go back and forth on it, so I hear both sides. I'm concerned about not adding some language based upon things. I think the language in the second sentence is the, potential sticking point. So for example, if someone created a post, so There's a blog on, out there for East Side schools. And some people have written, blog posts, an op-ed type thing. So does this preclude one of us in a matter that's developing from writing an op-ed type piece? And then it's possible that other people could read it. Is that, because I think it was much more intended for social media, kind of this sub thing, and we know of a particular social media that's been active in this district and that has created some level of concern, and that I think has been addressed. We have an understanding of not having a quorum there, not liking, not posting. But I am sensitive to Kimberly's comment is, does it disallow something that we've talked about, blogging or some other things, that we actually want to do? And so I'm not sure that it does, but a technical, harsh reading of it could say you couldn't even write an op-ed.
Actually, that's possible. I'm thinking this actually predates the local one. This dates back to when WASDA had a listserv, the PTA, Washington State PTA had a listserv, and people were running into issues of multiple board members being on the listserv, a discussion of district business. So I think it's not really singling out something local. It really is just kind of a broader things we need to be thinking about. Is this a situation where there could be more than one board member on it? I should come back and check, find, it's a cautioning us.
But even I guess, there's not, I don't want to blog or anything, so that's not what you're thinking of in one way, and I think that's great, Ken. I'm not even thinking if there's something I want to be doing. I'm just thinking of, okay, what does this mean, and what if you inadvertently or did something? It's more like innocent like that. Like I don't. So, for example, a board member's spouse has an account. You go through the spouse's account and look at something, or my daughter leaves her stuff up on my phone, and I look. The thing is I can't always be in charge of whether there's 3 or more board members. So, what do I need to be doing? I need to be taking the road that potentially there could be 3 board members looking at this, okay? But let's say I vet all that and I get this confirmation, no, there's not. Okay, I'm gonna probably take the road of not commenting because I think that's the safest road. But my point is I can't always tell whether there's 3 board members, and that's what concerns me.
Okay.
And yes, I'm committed to the best of my ability, and I really don't comment on those things, but I don't like that it narrows it down to that level.
So what if we add a reasonable person or a reasonable expectation that a quorum of board members, and then that way, if you're on the waffle knitting club side.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, and then,
it's like all these.
right, and it turns out there's
anything that
3
could
of
be
us.
construed
Right.
about like.
So that's what I'm getting at, Kimberly, is that it's not reasonable to expect that there would be, and we won't even use waffle, let's say it's the Tacoma Knitting Club, and it's not a reasonable expectation, but it turns out.
Say it's my school's Facebook page and some weird thing comes up, and
Right.
they're at
So-
university, there's so many different areas that I
Right,
can
so
just
what
see
if
this
we add
tentacles.
in a wording of a reasonable expectation, that a WASDA listserv, you do have a reasonable expectation that, right? So if we just add that in, that there's a reasonable expectation that a quorum could potentially be on it.
So the board so you're saying do the first sentence and then say a reasonable but then get rid of all the other language?
No, where it says where there is a reasonable expectation that a quorum of board members could view.
Wait, okay, so can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so by creating a post, commenting on another post, or affirming support for a post on a social media platform where there is a reasonable expectation that a quorum of board members can view the post.
Another thing that I, as I read this, I just see, the board recognizes that if you do post and comment and there is a quorum, that you recognize that that is a violation of OPMA. We all agree to that. So I do think that the way this is worded is actually precisely defining that we all agree that it would be a violation. But it doesn't say that there's any kind of penalty, or it's just saying we all recognize that would be a violation, which we all do. So I like the wording.
So I'm going to take a step to think about this. That may be kind of a clincher for me, but I don't want to disrupt what everyone else is doing. Again, I'm just going to, from where I'm coming from, I think if we're going to identify Open Public Meetings Act, we say many of the violations, not one. I'm not 100% comfortable with, and it's not because I have an agenda to go on social media and go do something. So,
Which is
but I'll think
understandable.
about what you're saying,
Yeah.
and then
and why don't
if I,
we can edit in the language and, you know, from my point of view, and as long as, you know, folks that listen to us speak don't mind us talking about it, I think this is really helpful to have these conversations because I like there being some clarification beyond the first sentence because it's such a gray area, and just to be able to document somehow what our agreement is as a board and how that final wording ends up being. I think it's great to work on that together, but I think it is helpful just to talk and to focus on social media because that's the question that's tricky. So how about we add some language? If anyone has any other ideas, if they want to chew on it, we can add some language. I might chew on it a little bit more also. Perhaps if there wasn't such the listing of examples, perhaps it would feel less prescriptive. Yeah.
and, you know, I appreciate everyone's input, so thank you.
No, and
We can come
that's
back to it.
yeah. You brought up a good point, so thank you for sharing.
Before we close this item, I just wanted to say, I think it's amazing how this board has come together in the very short time we've been together. And just the comments I heard after our last study session from a couple different people about how great it was and the communication. And I think this, going through this process and going line by line as we did in our study session, and I think it's important for us to do it finally here in our regular meeting. And so I just want to say how useful it is to have a board that's committed to each other and to the process and to open and honest dialogue and hearing all voices, and then when we do decide, you know, protecting and respecting the decision that we as a corporate body make. And I just, that commitment that all of us are sharing with each other and to the community and to the staff, I think is really, really positive. I'm pleased to be on this board, and I think this is a very valuable document for us to kind of solidify that.
All right, so shall we go to the next item? All right, thank you. So, and the next item is number 16, the first reading of board policy numbers 8310, insurance, 8320, property damage, and 8350, privately owned property. Any board directors have any questions, thoughts?
The question about insurance or self-insurance came up, and I'm not clear where, when, or how we have the kind of an assessment of that. And I was trying to explain that, if that's what exactly it is that we are self-insured. Is that our health insurance? It is our catastrophic property damage, general, and that was just, someone asked me that, and I'm like, I don't exactly recall.
So generally, when we refer to being self-insured, we're talking about our health plans.
Okay.
So we are self-insured in, I think, all of our medical, dental, vision, all of those are self-insured plans. Our property, other insurance, liability insurance, property insurance and such, we're insured through the Washington State, as a member of the Washington State Risk Management Board.
And then, so on that insurance 8310, would that policy speak to our choice of self-insurance, or is that not speaking to that?
That, to me, would be speaking to our general property and liability insurance, not to our medical self-insurance.
Thank you.
What is the amount that it says the district shall obtain errors and omission insurance in the amounts deemed necessary by the board. What did the board deem was necessary? And if you don't know, I'm not, but I just found that in.
So the auditing officer and, which is Julie and Larry, are both bonded for $50,000.
Any other questions on these policies? Reading, just making sure. Okay. So let's move on then to our next item, which falls under board reports and communications. It's a budget planning discussion. So this is the board president hearing lots of conversations that relate to budget and budget planning, and budget processes, and bringing them under an umbrella. And to provide some context, 2016, Olympia always makes it a bit of a challenge when it comes to budgeting, which we experienced last year, but we still have that certain uncertainty from Olympia. We do have, although it doesn't involve 2016 and 2017, the levy expiration, the levy cliff. That's a new wrinkle. We have an interesting year in terms of programs and projects. We've talked about implementing full-day kindergarten, which had a price tag of $1.5 million. There's transition costs associated with boundary changes, and Larry pointed out a very important part of that discussion around transition costs about opening up North Creek and boundary changes is that it's not just a single year cost, because we're already thinking in 2018 for a property on the Maltby site, so we're looking at probably several years, not probably, we are looking at several years of transition costs. So we already know that that's going to happen. So we have the full day kindergarten costs for next year, transition costs. Opening up another high school is going to increase operating costs $1.5 to $2 million, so we've already signed up for that. With our equity initiative, we've already had some costs in terms of running the focus groups and consultants, and that is right now an open item in terms of what impacts that could have in terms of financially in the district. We have open negotiations going on right now with NSD, and upcoming negotiations come on with NSEA, and then we just had a start time discussion, which could very well impact the bottom line as well. So it's looking to be a very complex year, and in preparation for the meeting on February 9th, we have a study session about budget planning. I wanted to kick off a conversation with the board to start thinking about the idea that there are only so many discretionary funds available. The idea that a lot of our expenditures are tied up in contractual obligations, and to bring forward, which is in the ESB, the core missions priorities that were done in 2009. So for the benefit of folks in the audience, when the recession hit, there was a large community outreach, a survey and all done to get priorities from the community in terms of how to rank resources within the district. And then in 2013, when the recession started to turn around and McCleary impacts were hitting, there was an informal, I hate to say informal, but another process done to also rank priorities within the system. So I want to make sure we have those priorities together, because that's what we have in our structure as a district. And if we have this complex year coming on with a not solid revenue picture yet, that talking about priorities will probably happen sooner rather than later. So I want to get them together for everyone. So this is to have an outcome, a desired outcome for the item. So it would be helpful, just as we had in the course of discussion tonight, if there's any questions or information that the board would like to start talking about in preparation for the February 9th study session, I think it would be helpful. And something I'd like to throw out, not to talk about tonight, but just to initiate the conversation that since landscape is changing, with McCleary in 2017 getting finalized, I think it would be a good time for the board to start thinking about in the fall of 2016 to perhaps go out and do another community outreach, since the landscape is so different since 2009. Start thinking in terms of our long-term planning, how to start structuring and laying groundwork for 2018 and beyond. And there's going to be a third. So these are the two I want to start with. Is that there's any ideas in terms of the board of information that would help us talk about, besides the priorities, help us talk about this complex year we have. And we don't necessarily have to talk about long-term planning in terms of community outreach, but I just wanted to start that conversation.
So if I can maybe just interject here and share a little bit from our baseline of what we're planning for February 9th. So first of all, this is a complex conversation, so I have no illusion, unless we're going to have a 36-hour conversation on February 9th, that this will be one of those accept non-closure activities. So we are, as we do every year, preparing a 3-year budget projection, which is a very, very high level, highly speculative, particularly when you get more than a year out, sort of global picture of anticipated revenues and expenditures. We have already begun working internally on what we're calling our 2016-17 program and staffing recommendations. So these are things that are kind of hitting our radar screen as areas where we may need to make some investments next year. Some of them are continuation items, like year 2 of the ELL task force implementation recommendation, those kinds of things. Certainly the full-day kindergarten enrollment mitigation plan that was approved last board meeting, I mean, that goes on that list. And then the third thing we're working on is, we've been working on for a while, is trying to itemize all of our transition costs associated with the changes of 2017-18. So both grade reconfiguration and opening North Creek High School. And again, Amy is correct. We're looking at it in a multi-year process. So next year we're planning for 17-18. Then 17-18 we have first year of implementation. Then 18-19 we have second year, as we'll do another round of staff moves as North Creek grows to 12th grade and the other high schools shrink. The following year, presuming that we're under some kind of construction at Maltby, we'll be gearing up for opening of a new facility and probably another round of boundary adjustments in the north end of the district. So we're trying to itemize those things. So our hope is to give the board an opportunity to kind of see our internal work and thinking about where we see the things that are on our screen. Now, I know you, as part of your conversations with the board, have been asking as one of your prompts, what kinds of investments do you see as necessary in the district as we look sort of beyond 2017-18, and I think that's getting a little bit at the conversation that Amy's referring to. So that's what you should expect on February 9th. So if there are other expectations you have or other things you would hope to see, please let us know so we can appropriately plan.
I'm struck by how old this document is. So I think it's really good that we're re-looking at that, because obviously that was when there was a lot of cuts that needed to be done during the recent session, and we're in a very, like you said, we're in a very different time, and I think it's critical. These all could change based on the fact that the market is so different, and so to be able to assess with our community, it was parents, staff, and community members that were surveyed.
Yeah, certainly the 2009 core mission priorities were were developed in a very different environment of trying to prioritize what we were going to maintain as we had to make some very difficult decisions. And they were very helpful, and I think guided us imperfectly, but guided us nonetheless during that time. And then, as Amy said, the 2013 is when where that was an exercise conducted in an environment of, gosh, it looks like we're going to actually start seeing a turnaround in state funding and more state funding rather than less. And so trying to do some forward thinking in that regard. But I agree that even the 2013 document, while not quite 3 years old, much has changed.
Was this 3-year document just done with the board, not with community, not with staff? No, I mean,
It was done with our ATM, which would be all of our principals and administrative leaders, operational support otherwise across the district, and then with the board as well.
okay. But not with community members?
Correct. The core mission
Yeah.
priorities was actually a community-wide survey process.
Could we put up the top 8? I think it would be interesting to see as I'm reading it. I guess I would be surprised if it ended up dramatically different. I think we need to ask that question, but if you look at those 8 things, those are all 8 things we keep talking about today. Class size, instructional materials, technology, highly capable, I mean, just put /challenge and there we go. I mean, those are all the things that we are still having many community conversations around. But again, I don't disagree that it's not time to revisit that conversation, but I think for the people that haven't seen this document, it's interesting to look at those 8 things and realize there's probably a lot of commonality of what our priorities are to that. I guess my only add to answer your conversation, Amy, so one, I would like in the fall for us to talk about bringing this back to the community and say, are these still your 8 and are they in this order? And then I know one of the things that we struggle as a board is as we come into the budget, it feels like a lot of it's already been decided. So maybe we could put a little asterisk by all the things in the budget that are related to board decisions that we've made. I know you mentioned the ELL task force, we approved its recommendations, the kindergarten, North Creek transitions, kind of all those things that we as a board have approved, but didn't kind of realize that
We're
also.
spending money along
We're
the way.
spending money, well, I mean, I think we realized we were spending money, but when we're now looking at it.
How does it tie back to the board goal?
Well, not how,
Or
but
what a board has
if we're
asked.
looking at our budget and we realize, oh, we did actually approve a huge chunk of this budget, it was in bits and pieces over the course of a year, I think that will help us kind of recognize the role that we do play. That's just my thought.
And conversely, I think it's always good, just because we're not immersed in it on a day-to-day basis, keep having the conversation about the obligations that are kind of hard-coded, at least, for the time being. Contractual obligations, the large amounts, that is not discretionary. I think it's helpful for me because I always think the bucket might be bigger than this.
So I think, we will be prepared to address that on February 9th. We're working on it right now. I would just, some of you have heard me say this and I'll repeat myself, so I'll just do it again. A mentor of mine once said, when it comes to budgeting, we can do anything we want, we just can't do everything we want. So it really is about choices. And with 87% of our budget essentially tied up in staff, when we get to that place of not having a whole lot of discretionary funds, it does really come down to choices and are we willing to look at providing programs or services differently or shifting resources from programs and services to other programs and services to meet other priorities, and those are very difficult conversations.
There's also a policy, I think it's 2105, that I saw on here choice programs on this, and then I saw it again on this list. And I know we're changing middle school and we're doing all these grade reconfigurations, and I'm not necessarily sure what constituted a choice. I'm not sure what role does the community have in bringing forth choice, and I think that I'd like that policy or any other policies, frankly, that might apply to any of these things, to be put in our board briefing before that meeting. So there's
So in the context of this document, choice programs were things like the PACE program or the IB program, programs that are important to certain constituents in the district and come with their own associated costs and how do we rank and prioritize those? So I don't know that this necessarily, I'm trying to think of what we would put in a briefing item, but you know, there's just lots of things that we spend money on, but in particular, this was really focused around PACE in particular. I think the EAP program at the time, we did similar to how we do now, where we had regional EAPs, and that's one model. You can also serve highly capable students in their neighborhood school, which is a different model and carries a different cost structure with it. So that was sort of the framework of that. 2105 was a policy that was adopted at the request of some community members who said, if we want to bring forward an idea for a new program or a dedicated, you know, type of choice school or choice program, what's the vehicle for accomplishing that? And that was the genesis of that policy.
And that takes budget too, and would that be a priority? And also, I think a lot of school districts, I don't want to go too far off tangent here, so I'm trying to reframe it back to this, but I think I've seen that in a couple of places, and I know that that's something that I'm hearing some, you know, community members might want to prioritize. And I think it's good to have the list of what is our choice programs and then what might that look like. And that's probably part of this discussion and also another different
And
discussion.
planning for the future.
Yeah. So can we get that policy in? I think a list of programs would be good too. What are our choice? You just named a bunch, Larry, but
PACE dual language probably.
the highly capable. Well, it's not a choice at the home
How
school,
we
it's a
provide the
choice
service is
to,
a
yeah,
choice.
yeah, the service.
Providing the service is not a choice.
I should have called it EAP and AAP. Highly capable.
You know, I would say any number of our career technical ed programs, particularly those that are satellite programs, are accessible to kids from across the district. I would put as a
Would you mind putting together a list? Because I didn't even think of those. When you mean like our the CAD? Is that what it is?
Or the composites program at Bothell.
Or the nursing, do we have, I think those are, I'd like to see a list.
It's hard to separate what's just an elective program from a choice program. We'll see what we can put together.
Thank you.
The request I would make is to have the documents, if possible, ahead of the meeting. So for the study session, I just think that this one might start to generate community interest, and also just to be able to look through that. And I know that as I saw the budget process unfold last year, because it was highly uncertain what was going to happen in Olympia, it was so late. Hopefully with a shorter session, there'll be more clarity more soon. But yeah, I think just having those documents ahead of time, if possible, would be useful. I have kind of a modeling question, and my gut is it's premature, but just this notion of what if the state gave us the same amount of revenue this coming year as they gave us last year, and what would really kind of that look like? And my sense is our costs go up, and if our revenue stays flat, then that could be a deficit number, and maybe it's just at that high level of if they didn't increase the money and we've made the other choices that we've made, we're looking at this kind of a budget hole. And I know those things are, kind of, they're not fake numbers, but they're very rough guesses. But just kind of what kind of budget hole would we be in if the state didn't give us extra money?
And I would say that's really the purpose of the 3-year budget projection. That's that very high level. So we will use the biennial budget that was adopted last year as our baseline for that. So it has, certain enhancements that are already programmed for this coming year.
Okay.
And then there's nothing I'm gathering that presumes Olympia is going to take any money away from school districts. We're not anticipating that. The biggest uncertainty in the 3-year budget projection will be right now the programming of the levy cliff. Okay. And so we're struggling a little bit figuring out how to model that. I mean, right now it is on the horizon, and so until it changes, we should presume that it's there. Realistically, pragmatically, I don't see any chance of the legislature letting $500 million of funding to schools slide off the levy cliff without doing something to mitigate that.
So, but that projection, since that's what's in law right now,
Will show a big hole.
will show it, right, in that,
Yeah.
and then just off the top of your head, do you know approximately how much more money? I forgot that it was a biennial budget, in the sense of already passed how much money they're planning to send to us next year.
I don't have off the top of my head, I know the biggest driver of additional dollars we'll receive next year, the two biggest drivers will be one, state 1.8% COLA, which then drives more state dollars that come to us, and then also drive a local tail, because it costs us more to implement the 1/8 that we receive from the state, and then additional K-3 class size reduction dollars. So those will be the two big drivers of new revenue to us next year that are already programmed into the biennial budget.
Good, you know, and as ideas pop in,
Would it be helpful with 2105 to have the procedures too? Just to see how the policy plays out?
this might be an item where we could talk about education. But, you know, in terms of bringing in the procedure and the policy and learning more about it, do I hear, so that's what you're requesting in terms of?
Well, I just was sitting here thinking about it. It brought it, it came to my mind because I saw choice in both of these.
Right.
And I
Right.
started asking, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? And then I saw that there was a policy.
So 2105 again was really, I think, driven by a number of parents who looked to some of the small schools, particularly in the Lake Washington School District, where you have specialty schools that are either schools within schools in the district or standalone schools, and wanted a vehicle for being able to bring those kinds of ideas forward in North Shore. So that's really the basis of the policy and the procedure.
So, and then, any other thoughts around this? So, and then another part of the long-term process is Ken has brought forward an idea to start a discussion about some of the more structural ways that we operate as a board around financing and auditing. And so I wanted to give him an opportunity to bring forward his ideas.
Thank you. So I had, I think in the board briefing, you guys had seen a document that I drafted, which is trying to get around this sense of what, it's really about what are the possibilities that we would have in the areas of really finance, auditing, and budgeting. And based upon what we talked about in our study session today, my thinking is to have perhaps this at the next, as a part of that budget process, because I think part of it is the budgeting question. The other question about like the audit committee or an internal auditor, there was an additional document that a citizen from the, it's up here with us, that we got from the transparency group that had been brought to the board before. So based upon the discussion that we had today, I'm not sure where the board is at in terms of wanting to move forward with the discussion and in the process, because I think many of these items really fall in line with our understanding of our finances and the planning for that. And so to me, it would make sense, based upon what we talked about, to have that discussion, perhaps as a part of the budget meeting. So I'm fine with that, if that makes sense. Does that?
Yeah, and let's, maybe to help folks process and think about it, maybe it would help to back up a little bit and just kind of introduce your idea in general, Ken, and what, you know, kind of what, for lack of a better term, you know, what area you're seeking to improve, and what some of the thoughts are behind it in general.
Well, sure. I think the basic thoughts are that for, you know, the North Shore School District is $1 billion enterprise, and that there are certain financial governance tools and techniques that large organizations, whether government, nonprofit, or business, would follow. And so the proposal is to get kind of a study group to look at those, so there's an understanding, especially of organizations somewhat smaller, somewhat larger, and similar sized, what are they actually doing in these financial governance areas? And then having that as a document that would allow us to say, so what would we apply, what could we borrow and apply and implement? So I think it's really, it's kind of first understanding at the board, mostly kind of governance level, what we could do in these areas of budgeting, finance, and auditing. And then, once we gather that information, process it and talk about it. So the proposal is an idea to gather information for the board's consumption and understanding, and then thinking about how the board would want to move forward in its role in the financial governance of the district.
So, just to clarify, to help me understand, you want us in the budget session on February 9th to talk about creating another study group? Is that?
I think that would be a reasonable time and place to talk about that as we're going through the budget. And I think as we go through the questions and see the information, we'll see various pieces to it. And so I can go into more details on each one about kind of the time frame I think that would make sense for them. But yeah, I think having that broader conversation, and especially since this wasn't on the published agenda,
Right.
I don't necessarily want to go too deep into
Right.
it. And so I think,
Okay. So yeah,
and I'm open to amendments on this.
Okay.
It's more, here's a thought document
Right.
going in this direction.
Right, okay, so two thoughts, and both have to do with just capacity. So we've got the study session to deal with the 3-year projection of the budget, and it's rarely a short study session it is. And then I'm hearing Kimberly wanting to add a conversation around choice programs, and that will not be, having done that one already, that's not a short conversation either. And then you're proposing a 3rd addition to the study session. I guess I'm just saying that we want to think about it. We're now looking at easily a 3 to 4 hour study session on February 9th to tackle those 3 separate topics. And 2, and the issue, just in terms of a study group, we have so many going right now. I'm a little concerned about capacity, and we as a board have on our next retreat agenda, we're
Communication, in the March agenda.
March agenda, where we're talking
communications
about
or community outreach and engagement.
what our study groups are for, and I guess I'd be a little concerned about creation of a study group before we've addressed that issue.
And so I hear you saying, it sounds like it would, this particular item would fit much more comfortably in the March.
Yes.
Okay, I think, and I think, Amy, you and I talked about that, and that was kind of a framing that you were thinking that it fit pretty comfortably, it could fit thematically into that.
And my thought was too, is more, I was thinking more of a capacity on a board goal level. You know, we just had a conversation about some board goals that were identified that we haven't had time to tackle, like about achievement gap, you know, doing more research around that. You know, we have an item to talk about, doing more training as a board around equity. So, you know, I'm wondering if also, again, sometimes these discussions are long, you know, it's good to start talking about that, but in terms of starting to do investigations, whether it's through a study group or not, whether that is appropriately framed within a board goal discussion for the future. And so, but that's, you know, that's, I think it's a similar question about capacity, Sandy, that you were thinking about. And to me, it's helpful to, again, kind of understand what benefit do we, you know, by a matter of priorities, what benefit are we helping the district with by going through the work, just because I happen to be not as well versed in auditing as other areas. And so it's helpful for me to kind of understand, to help me rank priorities, what benefit the district gets from our work in it.
So I'm not clear. I heard Sandy make what I'll call a friendly amendment to move the discussion instead of the February meeting to the March meeting. I wasn't sure what you were.
And I guess I was agreeing with the March meeting, but from a slightly different standpoint. But
Yeah. I think all those are really valid points and issues. And in terms of the necessity to move forward with this, I think given that we have a budget process We know kind of what that looks like. We know what time it takes. We know the information we get out of that. Going through that process with this new board, the finance issues, one of the biggest issues I think was the cash balance, which the capital projects folks, the support services folks, I think put together a path towards that greatly clarified that, so that issue greatly minimizes. And then in terms of the audit committee, internal auditor type thing, I think the audit's going to be done in February, as was mentioned earlier, and that makes sense, I think, to revisit it. So I think on all those dimensions, this is not as, we're making progress towards it. And so I'm absolutely, I think it makes sense to move it to March for both of the reasons, and it may not rise to the level of something that captures our priorities as a whole, and that's fine if that's the case. There's other ways it will move forward. If it's not a full board activities, we even talked about it, it's like one person's kind of thing, bringing more study and understanding. So I'm totally fine with that for all the reasons that are stated. And I appreciate everyone's interest in trying to understand and to appropriately place this. Thank you.
Can I ask a question before that March 9th meeting? Do you have school districts, do you know of school districts that in the area that are doing this? And I know you said review them, but I didn't know if you already knew, because I see there's government entities doing it, which I'm sure are like city government, but I would like, if you have that information, I think that would be helpful to bring it.
I have skimmed that. Have not done it in a systematic fashion. So for example, winning the budget awards, there's about 100 school districts that earn the budget award, both from the GFOA as well as from the OSBOE. And they're there, some of them are in the state. For example, Auburn, Bellingham has done some things. So there's examples in pockets of it, but you have to go through. And as we learned in the audit committee meeting, you know, that our district now is classified as a high risk for the federal audit because we don't follow generally accepted accounting principles. So that's an artifact of the state. That's not this choice that the district made to not do it and plug down that role, but it is a fact. And so a lot of this is kind of educating ourselves on where structurally we are from a financial governance perspective, which sadly, in my opinion, is, you know, a decade or so behind leading governments, but it's very similar to other school districts in the state. And so then, do we want to lead in that area? How and what are the appropriate choices for us? So I don't know if that directly.
If there is stuff out there, then I think it would be helpful to have it. If there's not, and
there is, but I hesitate to say, here's Bellingham and they do this thing really well, and then here's Auburn and they do this thing really well. And here's because you could pull, but it's a part of the whole system, and there's strengths and weaknesses that we have in our system as every organization does. So I don't want to just say, oh, here's this one perfect thing, looking perfect thing, and we should adopt that and that. And so,
no, I agree,
so
but I'm trying to get a visual for it. So
yeah.
like if there was something that, it's like doing Later Start here versus Bell, it's going to look different. So I don't know if there's some model out there that.
In each area, there are examples of people who are doing what would generally be seen by the professional associations as best governance practices. I don't think we have to follow all of them, and I think we should understand them and consider through as we go through, like I said, our budget process, the audit exit conference, and I think we'll have a much clearer sense. And I think we're making good progress towards that just because of the discussions we're having.
And I have made a note on my schedule, which I'll resend out to folks. So we'll talk about when we start thinking about March. The timing. We may have a situation where we have a very full retreat again. So we'll sort that through as we get closer. But thank you for the discussion. I think I appreciate it. This was something I kind of wanted to pull everything under one umbrella. I think it'll kind of help us sort through everything. So I appreciate the conversation.
We appreciate you having the conversation.
And so, at this point, next item on the agenda is future agenda items. Does anyone have any? After we discuss the framework, I do have.
I put mine 2105 on that.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
what-
but let's talk about that. So let's talk about your choice programs question, Kimberly. Is it more appropriately to talk about choice programs outside, since the budget conversation may be a very lengthy one anyways? Is it more appropriate to talk about it in a different venue?
I think it probably needs to kind of be in tandem because I think it's relevant here. I think it's something that probably needs to be vetted more with our community. I think it's something we need to vet. What does that, because I don't even know what that word means. So, what I'm saying is I think that choice means many different things to many different people in many different districts. That's what I mean.
And I think in the context of that document, choice was seen as where do these particular programs that have costs associated with them fit in an overall environment of diminishing resources? And because we don't have to do
This
them.
document or the policy document?
This
This
document.
document, yeah.
Because we don't have to do them, how important are they that we continue to do them simply because they're valued within the community? And where would you prioritize them if you're having to make cuts in other areas? So that's the context of that.
Big choice in, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, just for in context of this, hearkening back to those conversations, it was things like dual language. IB was a huge part of the big driver to the meetings. And it was just concerns that those programs those were the two, and PACE were the three big ones that were driving these conversations that we want to keep these programs.
It looks like
Having
on this 8.
PTSD flashbacks now about the reduction of the IB
None of that.
from a full-time position to a part-time position.
Yes, the
That
IB
was the context.
folks were very, very protective of their
But on this ATM, we have that again as expand current and or create new ones. So I know that's one piece of this whole thing. So I guess what would be helpful, if and then maybe you can.
Yeah, I was just going to ask for clarification.
Yeah.
What
So
you're asking
clarification, seeing the policy, because we do have a policy on that, and whether it's community driven or whatever, we do have a policy and what that looks like, what the protocols under that are. And knowing what choice programs we have. Like I think there's some that I might not know about, so we know kind of the big ones, but Larry, you said it might be hard to know what's an
The CT.
elective and what's, I know I took health occupations when I was here for 3.
Right. So
And that was amazing.
We'll take a stab at trying to produce a list, and we'll include 2105 and 2105P in the briefing. I will say that they have never been operationalized. We've never had a staff and parent group together come forward and propose a particular academic program. So the policy was put in place in response to a request, the procedure was created, and then it's never been accessed in any.
You said in Lake Washington they have, I think what I'm kind of hearing or understanding is that there might be other school districts that have done this, and I know there's choices becoming this. And like I said, how much of choice overlaps what we're doing, we're gonna have a project lead the way, and how much is, and so where this would be part of this discussion, it's also a separate discussion. So
do we want to start with information in the board briefing and just get it on the radar? And then, again, as we're starting to think long-term, starting to think about going back out to the community to get priorities, making sure it's part of the discussion. Am I matching what you're looking for?
yes, that sounds
Okay.
good. Let's put it in the board briefing, the things that, and I don't know, it's probably not a lot of work to get to get a list of what our programs
And
are.
you don't need big descriptions, you're looking just for a list?
No list, I think just a list, unless it's not obvious what it is. If it's an acronym, I might not know. Let me just say this is what it is.
But Larry, in addition to the list, are you going to include like the cost of the programs in the list? Is that easy to do?
Then you're starting to get into those are difficult to quantify. I mean, it takes something like a project. Take something like IB. So there's a cost associated with belonging to IB and getting vetted through their international organization, and then there's all the staff costs associated with IB. But if we weren't providing those IB classes to kids, we would have to be providing them some other classes. So there's a sort of an incremental cost